Welcome to another episode of Viatorian Voices Conversations on the Way. This episode is another roundtable on the way, a more in-depth feature to explore things a little further than we can squeeze into the usual 15 minutes. This roundtable continues our series focusing on young adults, featuring young adult associate Brian Hansen with various guests. These episodes are produced as full video episodes for both YouTube and podcast feeds. Previously, Brian and I were joined by Jacob Lesage, a young adult husband and father, a maternity BVM parishioner, and a VYC alum. We discussed marriage, fatherhood, and family life, and we encourage you to check out episode 55 on YouTube at Viatorian USA or in your podcast feed. In this roundtable discussion, we'll discuss what it's like to be young adults who, in the Viatorian charism and ministerial tradition, are teachers of the faith. Brian is back again, and this time he's joined by Mr. Zach Wulbert. Both of them are theology teachers at Saint Viator High School, where they've served together for the last several years. They'll share some insights from their years of striving to teach the faith. I'm Pre-Associate Dan Masterton, and it was my pleasure to host this conversation for us. I started by asking the guys how they got into teaching theology and what it was like to discern that vocation. Enjoy the conversation.
You're first, you're the youngest.
I'm first. Oh my gosh.
All right, let's hear it, Zach.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'll try to keep it brief. Obviously, everyone's vocation path or whatever is a long story, but I guess I went a lot of different routes in high school. Not entirely sure what I wanted to do. For a while, I really wanted to be an architect. Decided I really liked looking at buildings, but not necessarily the math behind them. I think kind of feeling what I was good at, what I really liked to do. And I had different passions, but were those passions worth pursuing as a career? And I ended up landing on, I really enjoyed my time in youth ministry, in the high school youth ministry, doing retreats and that sort of stuff. So, by the time I went to college, I already knew I wanted to study theology. But I was mostly going actually to be a youth minister. And it was my first semester there. First I realized just studying theology would not get me enough credits to graduate. So I was going to have to add something else. And then I also took a kind of a theology-ish course that first semester with a lot of people that were living on my floor. Kind of our community took the class together. And as we were preparing for our final exam, they were like, oh my gosh, how do we write these essays? They're so worried about that. And I had everything laid out, and I was like, well, you know what? Actually, it would be helpful for me to study if I walked you through each of the parts of this essay and kind of reminded you of
teacher before you're teaching.
Yeah, right. Remind you of what we went over in the lecture and that sort of thing. And I, outlined it on the board for them, and they were like, hey, you should really be a teacher. And I was like, I need more credits. So, maybe I'll look into this whole secondary education thing, and went through with it. And, I think I still had in this mindset of I want to be a youth or campus minister. And, I've been lucky enough to be able to do some of those things in addition to teaching. But I'm very passionate about teaching theology too. So I think it's just, kind of identifying some of those skills and passions and following that through, what you really want to do with your life and what you're good at and how you can use that to benefit other people.
Nice. What about you, Brian?
Yeah, well, I would say probably where it all starts for me, actually goes back to the time of my confirmation in 8th grade. I'm an Arlington Heights local, so I got confirmed at Our Lady of the Wayside. But I remember after my confirmation and transitioning to high school at Saint Viator, that when I started taking the theology courses there, specifically Father Corey's, when he was teaching fundamentals of the Catholic faith for a freshman teacher, I just remember really immersing myself in those complex questions that the larger than life questions, why are we here? If there is a God, like, why does God allow the suffering of people? You know, if God is all good and loving, like, I really think that freshman course at Viator just exposed me to those larger than life questions that I truly was interested in. And I think my theology teachers at Viator saw that in me. I think the theology courses, just when taking them, provided that space to just dive into it in their various aspects of theology, whether it be like learning the basics about the Catholic faith or the scripture class that they offered for sophomores. And then we had some church history class my junior year, and then ethics our senior year. But just along the way, I just loved being in that kind of, like, that's what the class focused on, like, and trying to seek an answer to a question that there isn't necessarily a black or white answer, or a yes or no. There's room for interpretation, and that's definitely what theology offers or incorporates into the subject. And so I really love that. I remember also taking, oh my goodness, I'm blanking. My junior year, Brother Lunar was my junior year teacher. And this man really, I think, was the catalyst for me wanting to possibly pursue a teaching career. I just loved, have you ever seen Dead Poets Society?
Yeah.
And Robin Williams? And just a very, he was a passionate educator. He would come in, be projecting his voice at the top of his, well, yeah, just be projecting his voice very loud, and like, he definitely grabbed our attention. Sometimes he would jump on desks or like move students' desks around to get the point across. And I remember like actively thinking to myself, like, usually people, when they think of like theology classes, I'm gonna, oh gosh, I gotta go to a theology class. I was actually like eager to go to theology class.
Okay.
So that was something, when I noticed that in Brother Lunar, like the fact that he was able to stir up those feelings in me, I wanted to do that for students if I ever became a teacher. And so like, it was really Saint Viator, the theology courses, that when I got to college at Carthage, that I wanted to be a religion major. And I, unfortunately, oddly enough, I wasn't able to minor in secondary ed, because that was, for some reason, you couldn't take religion as a major and minor in secondary ed and let that be your subject matter. So, but then oddly enough, at my senior year, they changed the whole protocol. And so then they were able to allow it. So that kind of frustrated me. But that's an aside. But yeah, I remember going to Carthage, and oddly enough, I said to myself, like, when I was trying to discern what sort of career path I wanted to go to, when I was taking all these like tests and quizzes in this career class that I took my freshman year, they said, teaching could be your area of interest, actually. And so I was like, I know what I'll do. I'll major in religion, minor in secondary ed, which it didn't happen. And when I graduate, I'll then teach at Viator. Like, now obviously that, like, right after I graduate, I'll teach at Viator. And I remember having that thought. Now, obviously that didn't come to fruition immediately, but the fact that, you know, I graduated in 2015, and then fast forward to 2019, I then ended up teaching at my alma mater. Was kind of like surreal.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of life experiences that happened in between, kind of bouncing off of what Zach said about like the ministerial component of theological education. Like, I think having some experiences where you can be involved in campus ministry or youth ministry, it actually, what's the word? I would say it enhances your ability to be a theological educator when you are finally in the classroom. So I think that's a little snippet of...
Yeah, related to some of the background that helped you discover you might have vocation to teaching theology, are there experiences within your campus ministry activity, or in your life of faith in your parish or at your school, where you started to see gifts or passions emerge in you that weren't necessarily from academics, but kind of told you what your heart and mind were made of that might translate to teaching down the line? I mean, you kind of talked about that a little bit, Zach, but does anything else stick out from the years leading up?
Yeah, I mean, I led a lot of retreats as a high schooler, and I always really enjoyed that. I mean, I tried to go on every retreat that I could, and be a leader as well. I think when I was given the opportunities to give a talk on a retreat, I would take that like so seriously. I would really think about it and go to like adoration and stuff, and like try to figure out, okay, what does God want me to communicate through this talk, and then I would memorize all my talks.
Wow.
So I just felt that was like maybe a little more personal touch. But I think something like that, where it's like that's an indicator of passion, right? That you something that you're willing to put so much effort towards, and develop, and I would forego some like other homework assignments, or like not study for a test so that I could prepare for this retreat. And my mom, of course, was not happy about that. He wanted me to focus on, and I did fine. But yeah, that was what was important to me, and that's what I wanted to grow in, and like really think about how I could do better, develop that skill. So that was something that it came out, and of course, like just interacting with people, leading a small group. I think being a theology teacher is just so different, because I mean, all teachers have to be like compassionate and whatnot, but you're talking about a subject matter that it is all about relationships. And if you're unable to form relationships with your students or coworkers or whatever, like that's going to hinder you from taking that next step. So certainly ministry, as Brian said, like ministry is so connected with being a theology teacher, even though in a lot of ways they are different, but they are connected, and a lot of the skills correspond with each other.
Yeah, and that vocational insight is really keen, that the way that you choose to prioritize and spend your time is usually pretty tightly related to what is your inner heart's desire, what you want to do. So good on you for recognizing that, connecting the dots. Do you have anything that comes to mind, Brian, from college or post-grad?
So yeah, this relates to the window of time between my graduation from college in 2015 and then finally coming back to Viator to teach. Obviously, I didn't go straight into teaching, but that was because I did volunteer work for the Catholic Church in the Diocese of Green Bay and the diocese within the state of Wisconsin. There's a ministry called Spiritus, where young adults in their 20s, that they live in community, young Catholic adults, and they travel throughout the state of Wisconsin putting on retreats where students between the ages of second grade through senior year in high school, depending on the type of retreat, they get to encounter these young adults who are on fire for the Catholic faith. And basically, it's like a retreat experience where they get to hear from the voices of 20-year-olds who are not much older than they are, but they get to encounter young men and women who love their Catholic faith and get to explain why they are committed to their Catholic faith. And so I think my general passion for theology from Viator and then Carthage, that like loving to study theology and asking those deeper questions, that then allowed me to communicate my love for the faith to young people. And it was during that 2-year period, it was 2015 to 2017, where I, similar to Zach, like we would have to memorize our witness talks in front of large groups of young people, like anywhere between 20 and 20 plus upward, sometimes we had retreats where there were hundreds of youth. And that can be really intimidating. But when giving those witness talks, there were like young people on occasion that would come up to me and be like, wow, like I can tell that you really care about what you're telling us about, like that you truly love your faith, and like they would express their gratitude for sharing that with me, and like that would cause them to like take a step back and be like, wait a minute, like being Catholic is not something that requires me to be like in my 60s and 80s to start thinking about, like I can actually live out my faith in the here and now. So I think like it was during that time that I learned just like what Zach was saying about how being a theological educator involves having an attention to relationship building. And I think I learned that really during my first year of teaching at Viator, because before I even started teaching, as I'm sure any like educator can sympathize and understand, like that first year of teaching and those days leading up to the first day of school are so like you're nervous, like you have butterflies in your stomach. You're like, how, like, are the kids going to respect me? Am I gonna be able to relate to them? And are they gonna take seriously what I'm teaching? Like you have all these thoughts going through your mind. And I remember during orientation when I was meeting other new faculty members and then meeting the veterans, and that's when I also met Zach, because Zach came in before me. I happened to run into Father Corey, my old freshman
Nice.
Teacher, and he also taught me my junior year. But I was like, do you have any advice for me? Like, I just happened to, I was like, it's finally here, like, and he told me, he's like, they, referring to the students, he said, they don't care what you know until they know that you care. And that kind of like perplexed me at first. I was like, wait, they don't care what you know until they know that you care. And I kind of took that and like put it in the back of my mind, and I just, like got pushed into the deep end of my first year of teaching. And that year, as Zach, as I'm sure he'll agree, you're like just treading water.
Yeah.
But at the end of the year, when I gave out the evaluation of the course, and that evaluation process also involves like, what did you think of your teacher? Like in any ways, any positive feedback that you can give about your teacher, etc. I had a lot of students, or even things like, what did you learn from this course? And a lot of students were like, when taking this course, I really got the sense that Mr. Hansen cared about me. So I saw that on a couple occasions, and here I am like so fixated on like, what did you learn? Like, which is very important. But then I recognized after reading through those evaluations, wait a minute, like I did what Father Corey advised me to do, is make sure that they know that you as an individual, you as an educator, care about your students' well-being. Because it's through that you form that bridge of trust that then allows you to continue sharing the Catholic faith.
Yeah.
So, sorry.
I mean, I think like going off of that, that's one thing that makes theology unique, is that it's about faith. So it's a lived thing, right? And I think, what did they learn from the course? Well, they learned how to be Christian because you showed that to them in the way that you interacted with them. So you actually lived out what you were teaching. And so sometimes, they don't remember like the stuff that they're tested on, but you can still show them how to live a Christian lifestyle just in the way that you interact with them.
Yeah.
I had a friend who also taught theology who said, you don't necessarily teach what you know, you teach who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And that kids are such good detectors of what's phony and what's authentic, that if you're authentically living your faith and it comes through your teaching, it all kind of connects together.
Yeah.
So what if we dig into that a little bit further? As you kind of started to be classroom teachers, you started working with young people, how would you describe your approach? What were you trying to do in your classroom? What were you trying to do for and with your students? How would you describe the way that you've kind of learned to be a teacher of the faith? Small question, right? No big deal.
I have to start every time.
Well, no, I can. I just...
Yeah, Brian, you do it. Zach can ruminate for a second.
Well, definitely, like, I've kept that motto of Father Corey's as like a foundation whenever I'm teaching my students, like always making sure that they know that I care about them. But like, a care that involves a couple of things, like care for just you as a human being, like having inherent dignity, right? Because we're all made in the image and likeness of God. But also, I think caring involves an invitation to calling that person to more in the relationship that you're forming with them, right? And that's what teachers are regardless of their subject matter, I think, are trying to do in that student-teacher relationship, is help students recognize the importance of whatever you're learning about, and help invite them to see their ability to explore this topic, right? And kind of challenge them in ways that they've maybe never thought that they could be challenged. I think some of the best courses that I ever took in my educational career were some of the hardest ones that required me to put in the extra work, and the teachers even saying this is good, but you can still do more. And sometimes those moments when that teacher says that to you, you're like, what more can I get, right? And then when you go back to the drawing board, by God's grace, you are able to do more. And it's in those moments where you have that healthy stretching that I find to be very important. So that's what I mean by caring. I think sometimes we can think caring means allowing the student to go at their own pace, or kind of be the dictator of the terms,
take advantage of you, maybe.
Yeah, take advantage, right? And obviously when that happens, there can be chaos in the classroom. But I'm trying to think what else was the question. Can you help me get back to
what's your mission as a teacher? What are you trying to do with and for the kids as you teach them the faith?
So this goes back to what Zach was saying about how a lot of times when the students leave your classroom and continue on their life journey, they might not necessarily remember all the nitty-gritty details of the course, those important talking points that you learned in the different units. And I think that's a healthy disposition that you as a theological educator need to have. For me personally, my mission is to plant seeds of faith, right? And I might plant the seed, right? And I might not see the fruit or the plant take shape and grow after that individual walks away with that seed of faith. But God called me to take on the role of planting it, right? And I think that's very much a part of our Catholic faith. So many saints along the way, they were formed by certain individuals at a certain period of time, right? And so I think that's my mission as an educator, is just to be humble in the reality that it's not all dependent upon me to make sure that these students have everything that they're going to be saints by the end of my course. That'd be awesome if they did. But to have that humility in knowing that I have a role in this student's life. So Lord, give me the grace to fulfill that role, whatever that may be, right? And do my part. So
I think a lot of what Brian said holds true. I think one thing, I always start the year thinking about and trying to express in some way that we're on a journey together. This isn't just about me throwing things at them and then they just go off and do their own thing, right? This is a process of discovery. There's just so much there that we can learn, that I can still learn. I learn from my students and such too. So I think part of my mission and my outlook is I'm on a journey with my students, and how can I maybe enter more fully into that journey with them. I mean, sometimes I'm up there teaching and I'm making these connections on the fly, and I'm I want them to be fascinated too. I'm oh my gosh, I'm just realizing like all this stuff is connected. Like, do you see this? I think I'm on this journey and I find it fascinating. I want to kind of pass that along to them and maybe like bring them along with me too, as we go through the course. So that's certainly part of my approach. But then I think a lot of what Brian was saying about striving for more. I think a couple charisms, one Viatorian and one Jesuit. I know we're Viatorian and whatnot, but there's so many connections with the Jesuits too. Of course, the Viatorian charism of caring for those counted of little importance, and I think we work at Saint Viator High School. We might not see our students as those counted of little importance, but I think sometimes they are. I think sometimes people look at them and it's like, like you're just a high schooler, or even in a great area like Arlington Heights and the great benefits that are offered at Saint Viator High School, it's still like, like you're a high schooler, you're just gonna do your coursework and then go on, and maybe you'll do great things later. And I think that's just not a great perspective. I think they can do great things now. I think we need that. We need this, rejuvenation, or just the idea that like you're important right now. Like every moment that you have here is important. And that's why I push them to think about bigger things, things that's like, oh, well, that's out there. That's like, I don't have to deal with that. It's like, well, you do. I mean, you're part of the world, and you do have to deal with it, and you can make a difference now, even just as a high schooler. You can start that process of making a difference. So along with caring for those counted of little importance, the Jesuit value of magis, which is kind of what Brian was talking about.
That's what I was hearing in his comments.
Yeah, like the striving for the more. And it's not just like I'm trying to learn more. I mean, obviously that's part of it, but I need to do more to be more. I have to, I'm not just doing this for no purpose at all, that there's a purpose and a point to everything, and I have to think about that. Why am I learning this? Why am I thinking about this right now? What more can I do with that? And how can I become something greater because I've gone through this experience? So, and I know that a lot of my students maybe don't feel the same way. Maybe it's just, okay, I just took that course, but I hope that at least some are like, that just pushed me to do more. And again, it might not be about like learning all these theological details. It might just be about living a different kind of life or a different lifestyle, or just seeking more passion, or whatever that might be, or your vocation, your calling, your skills, your gifts, and how you can share that with the world. And then preparing them for the beyond too. I want them to, like, hey, you're in this kind of bubble right now in high school. Maybe start to pop that bubble and realize, like, okay, like this is reality. I'm about to enter reality, and what more can I do there?
Yeah, and like reality is messy, and I think even just like, aside from like teaching the subject of theology, like in a lot of ways, educators, regardless of their subject matter, are teaching them basic life skills along the way that they're going to need for sure in college and then beyond the college realm. Like one thing that I really stress to my students is the importance of self-advocacy. Because I remember those times in college when, deadlines for major papers were coming up, and for me, one of my weaknesses is I'm a slow writer, and sometimes I like struggle with perfection and wanting my paper to sound perfect and be well written, and that would sometimes delay me. And I know there were times as a student in college that I reached out to my professor. I let them know in advance about my circumstances, and in those moments, I had educators that were like, well, here, I know the deadline for this paper is at this time, but I'll give you a couple more days to make sure it's all fleshed out. And that taught me, like, if I advocate for myself and I keep my educators in the loop with my academic journey, like, a lot of times those educators are going to help you and give you that extra support. And so, like, I've really stressed that to my students about, hey, if you have problems, let me know. We live in the 21st century. We have email. Like, there's no longer that excuse of like, oh, well, I just didn't know to contact you, So I think aside from the existential or the bigger picture, like, we're also along the way trying to form them to be responsible adults. So,
yeah, I mean, I think a discipline, and I think Brian and I have relatively similar teaching styles. And sometimes we get called like the hard teachers, But I think both of us have agreed that, we want to form our students in a very holistic way, right? And like sometimes that is hard, and sometimes they don't like that, right? Like obviously, and that's fine. I'm okay with that. I get it. It's tough and whatnot, but ultimately, I think, at least from people that I've heard and whatnot, they come out the other side like appreciating, okay, I've formed myself in a discipline, and the rigor ultimately, we meet people where they're at, right? Yeah. Like, and Brian was kind of just saying that. So it's not like, oh, well, tough. Too bad. Yeah, like, oh, you're struggling? Oh, too bad. Yeah. Just catch up or whatever. No, but at the same time, okay, how can we be rigorous and form them in kind of a discipline, preparing them again for the future, while at the same time learning about the faith and that sort of thing. So,
yeah, to retain your compassion.
Yeah.
As you try to hold them to a standard.
Yeah, like the fine balance of mercy and justice, or like mercy and like discipline, so to speak. Like if one overtips the balance, it kind of gets out of whack.
So as you try to implement these ideals and values and work through a curriculum and through units, what kind of challenges have you run into in your years as a teacher? Are there any kind of lessons you had to learn a hard way, or things that students had to kind of show you before you realized a way that you might have needed to adjust or approach the ministry of teaching?
Yeah, I think I currently teach the senior ethics course at Saint Viator, and just a lot of the topics are really tough, and over the last 3 years I've been teaching it, I've had to figure out, okay, how do I approach this, right? Like, I think the first year I started by like, okay, here we go. Here it is, here's the issue. And it was like, whoa, like, we're just like jumping right into like death and all of that, it's like, oh, wow. Okay. We're just doing that. And that can be kind of grating, and that can be a way to just like turn people away almost, like, oh, well, I don't want to talk about that. So I guess learning how to ease into some of these more difficult topics, and that's something I've worked really hard on the last couple years. Just, okay, just jumping right to that is very difficult and sometimes causes way more friction than needs to be. Maybe there's a more compassionate and gentle way to approach, and then we still do get to those difficult conversations, but it might be a little bit more palatable, I guess, once we approach it. So that's been really difficult to do, and one of the challenges certainly of theology. One of my friends is a science teacher, and he always says, yeah, I'm glad I just teach things that there's just like no argument. It's like, here it is. This is what it is. This is the chemical reaction. Learn it. Whereas we have to deal with, there are different opinions and different approaches and all of that. And I try to make myself open to that, right? Like, I get that people have different opinions than what the church teaching is. And we can talk about those things, you know? And it's okay if you're coming in with that mindset. But at the same time, I also want to show you the other way in a gentle way, but there is another way out there. So finding that fine line, I guess, has been tricky.
Yeah, young people are often spoiling for debate and maybe lose sight of dialogue or like listening. And I think one of the important roles for an ethics teacher is how can you help everyone be heard and also make space for this Catholic way to get a full hearing. And it's a tough responsibility, but I'm sure one that you relish a little bit in the way that it kind of calls out of you, you know, all your gifts and passions to try to do this really well.
Yeah, it is honestly, it's a very difficult course to teach, but it's also very fulfilling.
Yeah.
At the same time. So.
Yeah, to build off of what Zach was saying in terms of challenges, I think students, when it comes, in particular, because Zach and I have talked about this in recent conversations, just the writing capabilities of the new generation of high schoolers is at times concerning. That's the nice way of putting it. I think it's in the realm of theology, I think it boils down to like the inability to explain oneself, right? Like I think sometimes students will just give the straight answer, right? Or like they think they're giving the straight answer, but they're not showing us, the theology teachers, how they got to that answer, right? Similar to math, right? How you have to show your work explaining how you got the answer based on the problem or the equation that you have. For us in the realm of theology, and this is not just theology, it's English, it can be English, and social studies. Here's the question, what is your response to it? And sometimes that's an argumentative question, and you need to show your reasoning for it and pointing to evidence. So like in sacred scripture, in our scripture course, a lot of times I'm like challenging my students to be like, well, where are you getting this belief, right? How do you know that we are loved by God? Like where in sacred scripture do we get that indication, right? And I really want my students to connect the dots, right? Because in the realm of like dialogue as well, like especially with people who might not be of the Catholic faith, you need to have those connecting points, right? Like in a way, building off of the ethics, right? The life and dignity of the human person. That stems in a way from going back to Genesis 1, being made in the image and likeness of God, right? And that is a foundation which the church uses to make her stance on why life from womb to tomb needs to be protected. Or like when I think of like the issue of abortion, as a Catholic, when you are trying to be pro-life, when you're looking to sacred scripture, you can turn to the incarnation, right? God became incarnate and dwelt in a womb. And for like wherever God dwells, that place is holy. So we could build off of that and use that as continual building blocks for discussion. So like all of this matters, like all these different courses within the theology department that we have, they're all interconnected. And so, I think that's just something that I don't think students are aware of. And a lot of times I think when students come into theology class, either they don't come from a background of faith, right? Or if they did, it's very surface level, where it's like, oh, I went to Sunday school, or I went to Catholic school. So what's the program for students who don't go?
CCD.
CCD, thank you. And it's maybe coloring pictures of like David throwing a slingshot at Goliath, right? Like, but that's not what theology is, right? Like we're really taking these aspects of our faith and like diving deeper into them. Like, what's the symbolism behind the story of David and Goliath, right? That even people who may have the outward appearance of like they don't look like they're going to win, with having God on your side, anything is possible, right? And I think that's a message of the story of David and Goliath, right? So like that's what theology does, is like we're trying to take our students deeper. And I think a lot of times the challenge is like students just think, oh, it's just we're okay at being on the surface level, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think that goes back to Majas. I mean, the three of us, like we want to go deeper and whatnot, but I think we live in a society now. I mean, it's a TikTok, Twitter, or X or whatever it's called now, sort of thing where it's like I hear something for 30 seconds or I read, a short little blurb and it just makes sense at first look, and so that's what I'll go with, right? Whereas we have to pursue some deeper meaning. And unfortunately, that's just how we've been formed in this like social media world. It is all surface level. It's just like, okay, tell me what I need to know, and then I'll go with that. That's not theology at all. It's not just oh well, here it is, boom, there it is. There's always something more that can be grasped. But we've formed a culture that doesn't want to do that and doesn't appreciate going deeper, finding the more, and that's something that we as teachers have to struggle with. Is like, okay,
the attention the attention span of our students,
right? Exactly, like show your work sort of thing. I mean, it's looking at some of these papers. It's like they just wrote a statement that's kind of a catchphrase, sort of mantra. It's like, okay, well, what supports that mantra? Like you can't just take a tweet and be like, oh, that's a belief statement. That's it. It must be true. People post things everywhere that are not true. So like finding truth is so difficult today, and it takes so much effort. Are you willing to give that effort? Right? I hope so, and I want to show them that like putting in that effort is actually worth it in the long run, to actually know what you're talking about, to be an expert on something, right? That's a beautiful thing, right? We're losing, in a sense, expertise, I think. Where's it going? Yeah.
And just even a desire to, like, to your point, like to dialogue or to engage in classroom discussion. Like, I don't know if you recall, like Dan, from your times at Saint Viator High School, I got this sense, like during my years before the iPad era and apps and intensive technology, that I think generally speaking, like students would be more than willing to engage in, classroom discussions on the topic at hand, because we didn't have, we had to keep our phones away. Like if we had our phones out, like automatic detention or something, like that was a big no-no back during our time. And so I think because we didn't have, all we had was our textbooks and everything in front of us, and no technological devices, we had to be in the here and now. We had to be like, present, unless we were sleeping in class. Not to say that I was, but we had no other choice. And I think one of the challenges for educators today with their students is now a lot of times it's not like you are having to deal with a very disruptive class. Like our teachers in our previous, when we were younger, like, hey, everyone sit down, be quiet, I have something to say, quit like distracting your classmates. Now it's more like, all right, what do we think about this? And then there's just silence. And I sometimes want to play the song, like, say something, I'm giving up on you. Like, because it's like, there's in many ways, I think the challenge is there's an unwillingness to engage with what we're learning. And it's the challenge that we're seeing in our world today, like escapism, like escaping into the realm of technology, and immersing myself in the world that I want to be in, while simultaneously avoiding the reality of actual reality.
Yeah.
Like, this is the real world. Like, you can't escape it.
I was going to say the trend that I notice that we have to be careful of is curation. We, through streaming video, streaming music, through on-demand and DVR and all that, we can basically control everything we consume. And when we go into a classroom, we have to let the teacher do some of that curation for us. And so much of the other areas of our life are now curated by ourselves that I think it's really hard for young people who are like native to this trend to like suspend that and actually follow the lead of a teacher for 45 minutes or 80, 90 minutes, or, in college when they have to go to 90-minute classes or 2.5, 3-hour lectures. It's going to be tough, and it's going to be more of a learned thing than an endemic thing, just to how they learn. So it's kind of up to you guys to crack that open a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, two things that completely formed our current students: one-to-one technology and COVID.
Yeah,
and the clash of those two coming together. You've got your technology, and you've got separation. I think truly that set our current students up for, I'm just staring at a screen, like that's all I want to do. It kind of formed that habit of, I don't have to talk to anyone. I don't have to do that like verbal participation, just like give me a worksheet or, and it's too, like, people, a lot of my students would now rather work alone on something than in a group. Whereas when we were in school, it would be like, we get to work in a group. Like, heck yeah, I don't have to do this by myself. But now it's either I'm just going to do the whole thing myself, or okay, you take this part, I'll take this part. And that's where the talking stops.
Collaboration.
Right.
No collaboration, and no even when it comes time to presentation, right? Like, oh, well, I only memorize my parts of the slide.
No
right?
interplay.
There's
right?
no recognition of this project, all the different components of it. Like, it's also my responsibility to be aware of the whole, not just my part, not just my role. Definitely, like, they've lost sight of that, sadly. And not even a willingness to, like, all right, well, let's get together at the library and continue working on this group project. They'll just be like, they'll kind of ghost each other, as the expression goes.
So what would you guys say then, if these are all the challenges and the hardest parts of the ministry, what would you say are some of the kind of the joys and the consolations, the things when, can you think of times when things really clicked in a classroom or in a lesson or in a unit, or a time when a young person showed you something really powerful in the way that they realized something or gave something back to you as a student? What would you point to in your experience?
I mean, I think it doesn't happen often, but I every once in a while I'll get a class, like a section of students that they're just bouncing off each other, right? Like, completely engaged. I mean, last semester I had a class that we were always ahead of the other classes because I wouldn't have to stand up there and be like, okay, can someone say something? They would always participate, and they would all like, yeah, what that person said, I think that leads to something else. And like, that's just so beautiful, right? To like that, because that's theology, right? That's going further. We're building off of ideas rather than just, okay, I'm just going to say my thing or do my thing and block out everyone else. I mean, we have to come to understand everyone else and their thoughts and whatnot. And that can lead to agreements or disagreements. And that's okay too, because we actually learn a lot when we disagree with each other. So classes like that where I'm like, wow, I could just like say something and then like you'll take it. And, it is rare, but it happens, every year I probably get at least a section that's just like, oh yeah, like we're all just kind of in this together and would rather us talk than Mr. Wulbert talk up there, and I'm like, hey, I'm perfectly fine with that. I'll just kind of interject when I need to, but otherwise, like, you take it like that. I think that's a beautiful thing, and that shows me, okay, there are still people out there, students, who are willing to engage with each other. I kind of want to just like harness that and bring that to everyone. I almost want to like take a video of the class and show it to other classes. Like, look at this. This is beautiful. Like this is
and what
this is
every group can be capable of.
Well,
it's not like unique to any one set of students. They just have to kind of unlock it in themselves with you.
And it's just so much more enjoyable.
Yeah.
It's like, you can like fall asleep to me talking. It's maybe our listeners here on this podcast is falling asleep, but it's way more engaging and entertaining when people are sharing their thoughts.
And a reflection of church life ought to be both individual and communal, kind of interchangeably side by side, sometimes apart, sometimes together. And like a class like that mirrors that image of the church healthily and in a beautiful, joyful way.
Yeah, for myself, I think, one story that comes to mind, not at the beginning of this academic year, but in the previous academic year, I had a mother send me an email informing me that her family went to the Holy Land. And was visiting Israel and seeing some of the major sites of Jesus's ministry and where certain miracles, according to tradition, occurred, and just really getting to experience sacred scripture in front of them with their own eyes. And she told me in her email that she was amazed that her son was able to point out to the rest of the family members, like, oh yeah, this is the place in this gospel where Jesus said this or did this. And yeah, she just wanted to share that with me, that like she was really impressed with her son's knowledge as to the different parts of the story of Jesus. And what's really cool about that is, in my experience, before I started teaching at Viator, while I was still in graduate school, I went to the Holy Land in 2019 to be there for 3 weeks and do exactly just that, like see all the places. And I took a bunch of pictures and brought them back with me, and in our various units on especially the New Testament, I would show the pictures of those places of what we just read, right, to help. Because a lot of times, when you're just reading words off of a page, sometimes, sadly, we've lost in some ways as human beings, like the ability to imagine and to just put ourselves in those stories. And so when you get to go to those actual places and put the words on the page into this reality, you're like, oh my gosh, like you realize what happened here. So like, I think that helped that particular student really enjoy that trip a lot. So I think it's those little things, like when you receive a compliment from a parent or even a student at the end of the school year, of like, or when they're asking for a letter of recommendation when it comes college time, and then you ask them to fill out the form of like what they learned. You'd be surprised at like certain things that they really took away from your course. And even now, so this is my 5th year of teaching. I like the classes the students that I taught that have now moved on into the college world. Some of them still stay in contact with me, and it's not I hope it involves some of the topics that we talked about when I was their teacher. That's why they stay in contact. But I think it goes back to the relationship, right? They knew that I cared, and so they care what I know now. So, yeah.
So what might you say to young people, whether former students or just young people who might be listening, about potentially discerning a vocation to be in pastoral ministry or to be a teacher or even a theology teacher? what kind of advice or insight might you give to someone who's kind of just starting out that discernment journey and thinking about this for their professional life or career, or even as kind of like a lifelong, like deep-seated vocation?
Well, I think starting with the practical, if you are an individual who is wanting to maybe accumulate a lot of wealth and have a very luxurious lifestyle, I would say, practically speaking, if those are things that are really on your heart, that being a theological educator may not get you those things right off the bat. I'm not saying miracles can't happen, because that's a part of our subject matter.
There's always the lottery.
Yeah, there's always the lottery. But this is, to be a theology teacher, you're not, as the expression goes, you're not going into that role for the money. Or it's a role that money is not at the forefront of that person's mind, right? Really, it is at the forefront of your mind is, I've had an encounter with God in my own life, and it's transformed the way I see the world around me, how I live in the world, and it's been positively impactful in my life, and I want to share that with the men and women that I encounter, the young men and women that I encounter on a day-to-day basis in this role. I think that's at the forefront of being a theology teacher, or a theological educator / minister. And so, I think practically speaking, you need to have you really need to have that awareness going in, because I think at first when you finally get into that role, it occurs to you oh, well, financially speaking, it's not there may be some hoops that I have to jump through, or it's not all roses and daisies, right? But I think what keeps you joy-filled in that role is the experiences that I shared with you, where people will come up to you after the fact and be like, this really impacted me, and those are the moments that reminds you this is why God has called you to that role. So be aware of the practical aspect of the role of the theology teacher, but also know it's a calling as well. And it might not be a Moses and the burning bush kind of calling. You may have kind of little moments along your way leading up to it, like Zach, where some of his residence hall and classmates were like, hey, you're really good at teaching the material. Have you ever considered being a teacher? I think those are the moments where God's small, still voice is speaking into your life, and you need to pay attention to those. So,
one thing I would say is, well, first of all, so many Catholic universities and colleges make it really easy to at least minor, if not double major, in theology. So it doesn't have to be the only thing you're pursuing in college, and you could always start on that track of I'm just going to take a theology course, or maybe a couple, and just see what it's like to go through with that. And if I don't like it, I think the average college student changes his or her major 3 or 4 times at this point. So, don't be afraid of that. Don't be afraid of trying things, because, it's always better to try and see that it's not for you than go through college and then oh, actually kind of regret not pursuing that. Maybe I am feeling called to that, but I didn't pursue it originally, and now I feel kind of stuck. Oh, I chose this path, so I guess I'm going to go through with that. So try things. Don't be afraid of that. I think too, it's also one thing to study theology, and you can do stuff with that alone, but then also teaching itself is a whole other thing too. So, do you like being with people? I'm an introvert. I'm an introvert who puts himself in extroverted situations.
Seriously.
But every day I go home and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's it is exhausting. But do you enjoy being with people? And does that excite you? Are you not going to be afraid to public speak? That's part of your job every day. So think about some of your skills, some of your passions. I think it's good to just like sit there and like, okay, think about all the things that go into that. And then in the same way that you can try out, different theology courses, try an education course as well. I will say, probably in every major, there's courses that you're like, I don't know why I had to take this. And I think my theology courses, I loved all of my theology courses. My education courses in college, there were some that I'm like, I really don't know what I was to take away. But the extremely beneficial thing of getting that secondary education major as well was that I was able to spend time in schools. Whether that be, some of them would just be observation. Maybe you're entering college now, or you're already in college, and you've never really thought about what does a teacher do. I've just been in class, but I never really thought about like what the teacher is actually doing. And so like just going to a school and sitting there and like focusing on the teacher, not really what's being taught necessarily, but what does the teacher have to do, and then you are given opportunities as well to like take a lesson, and then ultimately you get to student teach. If you go through with an education major like that, you get a whole semester. That was the best education course that I got, was the one that I was teaching, not being taught. I mean, I was being taught certain things by my co-teacher, but I was doing the teaching because you learn so much by actually doing. So practice these things. Lead a retreat and give a talk. Like that. That's sort of. There's obviously a ministerial aspect to teaching as well, but then like giving a talk and okay, I'm putting myself out there. I'm putting myself in front of a group. What does that feel like, right? What kind of feelings does that stir up inside of me? Does it feel good? Does it feel like something I'm called to? Give yourself the opportunity to try things out.
And continuing off of that point, I would also say be prepared when you are in pastoral ministry or theological education to know that you have to at times revamp. With this part, in our case, we have a full class load, five classes. When you're teaching a lesson within theology, how you laid out the lesson may go well with one class and they just get it right away, and then you get to your next class and you're doing it the same way, and then all of a sudden you start realizing, wait a minute, they're not getting it as quickly as my other class. And so in the moment, sometimes in pastoral ministry, and you definitely learn it on retreats even, things may come up during the retreat event that were unexpected, and same thing in the classroom. Something may happen unexpectedly. You don't have a full class, some students are absent, and it's in that moment where you as an educator or you as a minister, you have to, and some people this is easier than for others, is adjust and adapt in the moment. And that, for some people, that will take extra learning, and then for others it will just come naturally. But I think the other thing I would want to encourage young people who are considering pastoral ministry is also to have, if this is truly on your heart, if you think that the Lord is calling you to this role, to also have faith that all the experiences that you've had prior to it have actually prepared you for that role. So I'll give you an example. For myself, I did theater at Saint Viator High School freshman year through senior year. I was in all the plays, I was in all the musicals. I even did it even before my high school years, starting in kindergarten. My mom got me into theater. And I really loved it. I loved doing those shows and, being in plays and being certain actors and putting myself out there in the roles that I played. When I got to college, I minored in theater. But as the years were going on, I just got this sense that I didn't want to do theater as a career for various reasons. But that love and passion that I had for theater, when all the skills that I needed to be in that sort of role or like that activity is things that I need in the role of an educator. Being able to stand in front of a large group of people and present whatever we're talking about, right? Like I've had to use those skills in theater in my theological education, and even like in pastoral ministry when I was at Spiritude, speaking in front of people on a particular topic. So I guess what I'm trying to say is like God does not waste the life experiences that you have. Like if you truly allow God and you give all those life experiences that you've had prior to whatever God is calling you to next, like if you give that over to him and say, use what I've done so far in life, like he'll definitely bring that to fruition. So I guess what I'm trying to say also is like, do what you're interested in the here and now. You may be surprised. You may be able to use those things in your professional career, even if those things don't end up in an actual career within that thing. I don't know if that's making sense, but it kind of gives hope to those people who are like, can I really do this? It's like, well, kind of to Zach's point, in a lot of ways, you don't know until you're actually in our case, in the classroom. Like, yeah. I didn't have I wasn't minoring in secondary education. I did read some like how to teach books, but they were, in a lot of ways they were very robotic, and they gave scenarios that not all the times would line up with your age group of students. And it's really, to Zach's point, like you just gotta be pushed into the deep end and just start treading, and then you learn how to swim.
That's all for this installment of Roundtables on the Way. We thank Brian and Zach for their ministry in our Viatorian school and their dedication to walking with and forming our young people. Viatorian Voices Conversations on the Way is a production of Viatorian Vocation Ministry. The Viatorians are professed brothers and priests, together with women and men lay associates, who proclaim Jesus Christ and his gospel and raise communities where faith is lived, deepened, and celebrated. In the footsteps of Venerable Louis Querbes and under the patronage of Saint Viator, we strive to do everything well so that through us, Jesus may be adored and loved. To learn more about our community, visit Viatorians.com or visit us on social media at Viatorian USA. Those seeking support and accompaniment in exploring God's invitation for them are invited to reach out to Vocation Ministry. Send us a DM on social media or email vocations@Viatorians.com to start a conversation. Young adults seeking to engage with the Viatorians and other Viatorian young adults can request to follow our private Instagram @ViatorianYA on the way to connect. On behalf of Brother Peter and the Viatorian community, I'm Pre-Associate Dan Masterton. Venerable Louis Querbes, inspire us. Saint Viator, pray for us. Adored and loved be Jesus.